Welcome to Enduring Training for Directly Observed Therapy DOT Workers. This is Lesson 2, TB 101 for DOT workers. The learning objectives for this lesson is to discuss an overview of TB disease and to discuss an overview of TB infection. This lesson will provide an overview of TB, which include a brief history, current epidemiology, and a discussion on how TB is spread, diagnosed, and treated. So what is tuberculosis? TB is an airborne disease caused by bacteria that is most commonly found in the lungs. However, TB can make its way to any part of the body. This is one of the greatest misconceptions about tuberculosis, is that it's only found in the lungs, which is not true. There are two stages of TB, or two types of TB rather, TB infection and TB disease. TB, if not treated properly, can be fatal. TB disease was once the leading cause of death in the United States. And according to recent reports, TB is now the top infectious disease killer globally, even greater than HIV. The bacteria that causes tuberculosis is called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It is a rod-shaped bacterium. Some people refer to it as Koch's bacilli because it was discovered by Dr. Robert Koch in 1882. Every year, on March 24th, we celebrate World TB Day in honor of Dr. Koch's discovery. Other microbacteria that can cause tuberculosis disease include M. bovis, M. africanum, M. microti, and M. canneti. Microbacteria that do not cause TB are often called non-tuberculosis microbacteria, or NTM. One common type of NTM is the M. avium complex. Non-tuberculosis microbacteria are not usually spread from person to person. It's important to note that M. tuberculosis is a slow-growing bacteria. TB is also referred to as consumption, wasting, the white plague, lung sickness, and Pott's disease if TB is in the spine, and scrofula if it's in the neck lymph glands. It's important to become familiar with these alternate names because some of the population do still refer to TB in some of these terms, especially the elderly population. A little history on TB. Until the mid-1800s, people thought that TB was hereditary, which makes sense because typically people in the home, the family in the home, would be the ones who were exposed to TB. It was not until the end of the 20th century that a cure for TB was found. Prior to this, people made their way to sanatoriums in hopes of being treated. Treatment at the sanatoriums included bed rest, fresh air, and healthy food. Some patients received extensive surgeries such as partial lung removal and procedures to purposefully collapse the lung. The deadliest killer in human history. This is a recent PBS documentary about the history of tuberculosis. Here's a little clip.
American experience.
Rich, poor, young, old, no one was spared.
A disease that plagued mankind for centuries, and the search for a cure.
It's the first public health campaign in American history.
The Forgotten Plague. Tonight on American Experience.
In cities across the country, public officials began to call for government intervention. Health departments, primarily concerned with preventing diseases carried in the water supply, now had to confront a deadly illness spread through the most casual of contact.
Public health officials felt they had to conduct a massive national campaign to bring the news to everyone in the United States. In fact, it's the first mass public health campaign in American history. There's nothing like it before. The campaign to teach every single American that they needed to be careful about how they coughed and sneezed because you could never tell who was sick and who wasn't.
And they passed these brochures out so that people could understand that spitting could spread the disease. Coughing without a handkerchief could spread the disease. They promoted the use of Kleenex. I mean, this is how Kleenex came about.
Women's hemlines start to go up after 1900. It was so you could get your skirts out of the dirt and not carry home a load of germs into your house.
So how much TB is there in the United States? Every year in October, the CDC releases reported tuberculosis in the United States, with the numbers of reported TB cases from the previous year. This is the front cover of the 2015 report that was released with the 2014 numbers. You can access the full report by going to the CDC website. We are going to do a summary. Actually, the first time that I've ever seen a document like this that's, to me, very easy to read. So I was really glad to see the CDC do something like this. So in summary, we had 9,421 TB cases reported in 2014. That's a case rate of 2.96 cases per 100,000 person. Both the number of TB cases reported and the case rate decreased compared to 2013. So essentially, we did better in 2014 than we did in 2013. However, the case report decline rate is 1.5, where previously it was 2.2. So this year, even though we did better, it marks the smallest percentage of improvement. This document will be in your files folder, so you can pull it and you can look at it more closely, or you can print it out and share it with others. It's important to know what's going on in your state. So New Mexico Department of Health very wisely copied the CDC graphic and created their own fact sheet. So these numbers are specific to New Mexico. You'll see their logo on the bottom right-hand corner. But every state TB program has access to their information. Really, you have access to the information if you wanted to dig through everything, but this is just such a nice, clean way of looking at it. It's important to know what's going on in your state. If you're not sure or you don't want to go through the trouble of reading the whole report, you can go to your state website or you can ask your TB program. This is a map of the US TB case rates. So all the states in blue are those above the national average. Those states are Alaska, Hawaii, California, Texas, Arkansas, Georgia, Maryland, DC, New York, and New Jersey. These states have greater than 3 per 100,000 reported. This is important if you are those states or if you border one of those states. So I wanted to throw this in here so you can kind of see visually what's happened since the early 90s, where TB case rates were really very high. You see in the dark blue, those are all US born, and then the light blue are foreign born. So you can see the trends. The numbers are coming down for the US born, and they're coming down a little bit for foreign born, but that's still where the highest population of TB cases are. I wanted to include this specifically as a DOT training so you can see how patients are receiving their medications, and you can see that throughout the year, more and more patients are receiving their medication via DOT only. This is a great improvement. So how many people died from TB in the United States? It was reported 555 deaths in 2013. This is an 8% increase from 510 TB deaths in 2012. Overall, the number of TB deaths reported annually has decreased by 67% since 1992. However, we also had a significant decrease in TB rate since 1992. So in a resource-rich country like the United States, to have 555 deaths from a curable and treatable disease is just unacceptable. Globally, 1.5 million people died from TB. Of those 1.5 million, 140,000 children died of a treatable and curable disease. So who's at risk for TB? Anyone who has shared airspace with a person who has the infectious form of the disease. Those who are at higher risk are recent contacts to a patient diagnosed with a contagious form of TB, children who are under the age of 5, persons diagnosed with an immunocompromising disease such as HIV-infected individuals or persons taking steroids, and IV drug users. TB transmission, droplet nuclei are spread from person to person when an infectious person coughs, sneezes, speaks, or sings. Transmission occurs when another person inhales the organism. Droplet nuclei are small particles containing the TB bacteria expelled into the air by a patient with infectious TB. So you can see this picture is very graphic, but it shows exactly what droplet nuclei are. TB pathogenesis. When a person inhales air that contains M. tuberculosis, smaller droplet nuclei may reach the air sacs of the lung. And these small air sacs is where TB infection may begin. And you can see the picture here, the red dots is that droplet nuclei, the person inhales it, and it can make its way all the way into the little alveoli, which goes all the way, kind of the branch of the lungs. Some of the bacilli are killed, but few multiply and enter the bloodstream and spread throughout the body. The body's immune system usually intervenes within 2 to 8 weeks, halting multiplication and preventing further spread. Emphasis on the word usually. Do keep in mind that not everyone who is exposed to a person with infectious TB becomes infected with M. tuberculosis. The probability that TB will be transmitted depends on 4 factors: the infectiousness or contagiousness of the patient, the environment that exposure occurred. The more closed in the environment, the greater the risk. The length of exposure, the more time you spend around a patient who is infectious, the greater the risk. The virulence, or how strong the bug is. Unlike the cold or flu, TB cannot be spread by shaking hands, sharing clothing, sharing food and or drinks, touching the same doorknob that a patient with TB touched, using the same toilet seat, or eating utensils. Here's a short video clip that the CDC produced on tuberculosis transmission and pathogenesis.
Tuberculosis, also known as TB, is spread through the air from one person to another. When someone with pulmonary TB disease coughs, TB bacteria are expelled into the air in tiny water droplets. These droplets can remain floating in the air for several hours, making it possible for someone nearby to inhale them. Once a person has breathed in droplets that contain TB bacteria, they travel down the trachea and enter the lungs, where they collect in the alveolar sacs. Once in the alveolar sacs, the bacteria begin to multiply. The body's immune system starts working and macrophages begin to surround the bacteria. A granuloma is formed to keep the bacteria from spreading. The TB bacteria remain in the lungs, but the body is protected from disease by the granuloma. In 8 to 10 weeks, the person will most likely test positive for latent TB infection. The progression from latent TB infection to TB disease occurs when the granuloma break open and the TB bacteria multiply. Then the person becomes sick with TB disease and may be infectious. This progression can occur immediately after infection, many years later, or not at all. When the TB escapes from the granuloma and begins destroying a person's lungs, it's called pulmonary TB. TB bacteria can also enter the bloodstream and travel to other parts of the body, causing extrapulmonary TB.
Here's a nice graphic of transmission of TB. So it kind of just goes through the phases. Transmission occurs, pulmonary tuberculosis happens for some, and then the various progression stages from LTBI or TB infection to TB disease. Signs and symptoms of TB are cough for 3 weeks or more, coughing up blood or sputum, having a fever, chills, weight loss, fatigue or weakness, loss of appetite, night sweats, and it's not just sweating because you're hot, it's a pretty severe sweating where you'd have to get up and change your clothes or your sheets. Screening and evaluation tools, we have the Mantoux tuberculin skin test, also referred to as PPD or TST. Interferon gamma releasing assays, also referred to as IGRAs or IGRA. The two different types of IGRAs are T-spot and quantiferon or QFT. We have radiology, so we do chest x-rays and CT scans. And laboratory, we have sputums and NAT. The Mantoux tuberculin skin test, PPD comes from purified protein derivative, and TST is the tuberculin skin test. So you'll see those acronyms a lot. Essentially, what it is 0.1 mLs of the PPD solution is placed intradermally, which is just under the skin. And when you're placing the skin test, you should be able to still see the bevel just under the skin. You'll create a wheel like in the picture up front or up top. And then you send the patient on their way and you ask them to return within 48 to 72 hours after administration. Induration, not erythema, are measured to give us our results, and results are based off of cutoff points. So if positive reaction or an induration is created because of an immune response, a negative reaction is someone who has no induration, or if they do have an induration, it's 4 millimeters or smaller. That's always considered a negative reaction. And if you see the picture here, you can see that there's redness around the induration. You can see the induration marked off with a pin. So again, they're measuring the induration only, not the redness. To interpret the skin test, here's a little graph. I'll include a handout into the file folder. Essentially, depending on why the person is being screened for tuberculosis, will determine where they fall into this table. The interferon gamma releasing assays, it's a blood test, and again, the two brands that manufacture this are T-spot and quantiferon. It's a preferred test for persons with BCG vaccination or persons who you feel may not return for that second reading or that second appointment to have their skin test read. The differences in currently available IGRAs, I took this straight out of the CDC website. So this is just a little table so that you can kind of see the differences between the two tests. So I said this is the preferred test for persons with BCG, but what is BCG? BCG, or Bacillus Calmette-Guerin, do not attempt to say that, just go with BCG. It's a vaccine that's used in many countries with a high incidence of TB, such as Russia or the Philippines. We don't use it here in the United States, and the BCG doesn't completely prevent people from getting TB. For the most part, it reduces the severity of TB in some children, but it doesn't prevent from getting TB. BCG may cause a false positive tuberculin skin test. Persons who have been vaccinated with BCG can have a TB skin test, or they can have the blood test. Typically, the BCG wanes over time, so if you have someone who is a contact to a known person who has infectious TB, and they were vaccinated when they were born and they're 30 years old now and they have a positive skin test according to the table, which is greater than 5 millimeters, we're going to accept that as a positive even though they have had that BCG. Chest x-ray, we do a posterior PA or lateral LA, that's what they're referred to as. So a PA is given to everyone who has a positive skin test or IGRA. Children under the age of 5, persons who are HIV positive, or individuals who are immunocompromised will also receive a PA chest x-ray regardless of their skin test or IGRA result. The lateral chest x-ray is typically reserved for children under the age of 5, but it may be requested for adult patients. It's important to note that TB/HIV co-infected persons can present with normal chest x-rays or with infiltrates in any lobes and in any location. A CT scan can improve chest x-ray evaluations. So this is just an image so you know what a PA is. It's essentially looking from the front. And an LA is looking from the side. Sputum smear. A collection of sputum, not spit, for evaluation. It's collected by coughing or huffing to produce mucus from the lungs. It can also be collected via bronchoscopy, which is a thin tube that's inserted into the airways. Specimen is looked at under a microscope, and AFB, if present, are counted within the field. This is cultured out to provide a definitive diagnosis, and you can kind of see the image here. So essentially, they're putting the sputum into a petri dish and they're looking at it. And by they, I mean the lab people. So what is AFB? AFB, according to the APHL, is an organism including microbacteria that resists decolonization with acid alcohol due to the lipid-rich mycolic acids in the cell wall, thereby retaining the primary strain. So that was a lot of words, but I included a video to kind of give you a visual of what it is.
Acid fast is because a fatty acid in the cell wall of acid fast bacteria, known as mycolic acid, gives these cells the ability to resist decolorization with acid alcohol in certain staining procedures that are used to identify this bacterium. In addition, this mycolic acid also makes these bacteria impermeable to a lot of stains, such as those used in the Gram stain. You can basically think of the mycolic acid as a type of wax coating applied to the cell wall of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. If you were to take a little drop of olive oil and put it on a wax cookie sheet, the oil would slide right off. It wouldn't be absorbed. Likewise, many stains would slide right off of this bacterium in a very similar fashion.
So what is a NAT? We talked about NAT too. NAT is a nucleic acid amplification test. And again, this is a lab feature. I'm not a lab person. I understand it, but I thought this video would give a good overview of what a NAT really does.
Hospital in Kampala is one of the few locations which has a device that is being hailed as revolutionary in the fight against TB. Alfred Andama is one of the lab technicians trained to use it.
This is where we load them into the machine and it runs for the time prescribed.
It may not look like much, but this little black box, called the Gene Expert, cuts the diagnosis time for TB and the even more dangerous multidrug-resistant TB to less than 2 hours. It achieves this by analyzing the patient's DNA, looking specifically for genetic sequences that are associated with TB. All the operator has to do is treat each patient's sputum sample with chemicals to kill any TB, making it safer to handle. Transfer each sample into a special cartridge, then load the cartridges into the Gene Expert, 4 separate patient samples at a time. Less than 2 hours later, the DNA has been tested and the results are in.
And the results, as you can see in the results column, the first one is MTB detected, and the rest are MTB not detected. In the assays, you find that MTB, where MTB was detected, there was no rifampicin resistance detected.
So the difference between TB disease and TB infection. So someone who has disease is contagious, symptomatic, usually have a positive TST or IGRA, may have an abnormal chest X-ray, and may have a positive sputum. Those who have TB infection are not contagious, not symptomatic, have a positive TST or IGRA, has a normal chest X-ray, and has a negative sputum. So again, a person with infection has a positive TST or IGRA. Their chest X-ray should read normal. It may read abnormal, not consistent with tuberculosis, meaning that they just have something else going on that they just happen to see because they happen to have an X-ray done. They have a normal physical exam. This person is infected with tuberculosis. Prior to starting them on treatment, TB disease must be ruled out. Treatment is recommended and encouraged, but treatment is optional. It's important to explain the treatment prevents from infection progressing to TB disease. Diagnosing TB disease. So a person with a positive TST or IGRA, a negative TST or IGRA does not exclude a TB diagnosis. So someone can be diagnosed with TB disease and have a negative TST or IGRA. This person will have an abnormal chest X-ray consistent with TB if it's pulmonary. Remember, TB can be anywhere in the body. The patient will be symptomatic. If it's extrapulmonary, they'll have pain in the area. They'll have positive for AFB organisms, NAT positive, culture positive, or if there's high clinical suspicion. Treatment of TB. TB disease can be treated by taking several drugs at a minimum of 6 months, but sometimes longer. It is very important for the patient to finish the medicine as prescribed. Patients who do not may become sick again. The germs may become resistant to prescribed medications. TB that is resistant to drugs are harder on the patient and more expensive to treat. It's also a lengthy treatment, with some patients taking as long as 2 years to cure. Pulmonary TB, again, is the most common form of tuberculosis. Patients with pulmonary TB often have an abnormal chest X-ray. They should be considered infectious until otherwise indicated. As I've said a few times, TB can be anywhere in the body. So extrapulmonary TB is essentially TB that's found outside of the lungs. It can be in the larynx, the lymph nodes, the brain, the kidneys, the eye. It could be anywhere. Extrapulmonary TB occurs more often in HIV-infected or other immunosuppressed persons or in young children. Drug-resistant TB. Disease that is resistant to anti-TB medications normally used to treat the disease. Multi-drug resistant, or MDR, is resistant to at least isoniazid and rifampin. Extensively drug resistant, or XDR, is resistant to isoniazid and rifampin, plus resistant to any fluoroquinolone, and at least one of 3 injectable second-line drugs, such as amikacin, kanamycin, and capreomycin. Now that we've gone over the science of TB, here's a video to show the personal effect of TB.
It's an ancient disease is what I thought. I just didn't believe that. I was like, I can't be at risk for this. I'm strong, I'm healthy.
Do you need anything else, Bea?
I'm from Paris, Tennessee. It's rural Northwest Tennessee, home of the world's biggest fish fry.
Just go ahead and start the sandwiches.
Whoops. Fancy grilled cheese, y'all. Right here.
My church from Nashville was taking a mission trip to South Africa. I knew I had to go.
Let me bless it real quick.
Yeah.
The nourishment of our bodies and ourselves to your service. In your name I pray.
I got back in late December of 2007. January, I felt normal. And then by March, symptoms started to pop up. My doctor, he took a chest x-ray and he said, "You've got pneumonia." I went back for a follow-up. They did a needle aspiration right through here. They stuck the longest needle I've ever seen in my life through me and grabbed a piece in my lung and studied it. At the end of March is when they called me and gave me my true diagnosis. And they told me that I had tuberculosis. At that point, I thought, okay, I'm gonna be treated for 2 weeks on isolation, and then they can rehire me at my job and I'll go back to work and just continue to take the medication like nothing's wrong. What actually happened was those 2 weeks became 4 weeks, and those 4 weeks became 8 weeks, and then those 8 weeks became 12 weeks of isolation. Isolation separates you from everything that you love. I mean, I couldn't see my friends. I couldn't go to my job. What was inside of me was a threat to other people.
I could not see her. She couldn't see me. It was a family destroyer. That was a difficult time. I always just wished I was close enough to hold her. It's close to me, you know.
Jail, that's what she called it. She would get out, we'd go directly to the doctor's office, so she'd had to wear the mask.
The mask, that kind of puts a stigma on you. You see a mask on someone, then you're going to try to keep your distance. She felt dirty, you know, she felt like that people just were making a point to move away from her.
Every morning, a healthcare worker would come out to my house, give me all the oral drugs that I would take by mouth, and then I would come into Vanderbilt, have an infusion for a couple of hours, drive 30 minutes back home. I would take my second dose of oral medicine. That became my life for the next 2 years.
Well, TB's been a foe of man, dating back to the Egyptian pharaohs and mummies.
It's been described in ancient Indian texts 3,000–4,000 years ago. It was known as Shaya Roga, or the wasting disease.
In the UK, it used to be called the White Plague.
In the 19th and 20th century, it was the leading cause of death. 70 to 90% of the world's population in North America and Europe were infected. It was killing about 80% of the people that became sick with TB.
TB bacillus was discovered by Robert Koch, more than a century ago.
It was the treatments that was the game changer. If you look at the curve in the United States, it was coming down, from the early part of the 20th century down to the modern times. It was almost a straight line disappearing.
The notion was that we had the tools to control this disease. Incidence of TB was declining across the world. We globally got lulled into a sense of complacency that we had this problem under control.
So there was not a lot of incentive on the part of biotech, physicians, scientists who are interested in this. If you looked at the number of people, it is quite shocking. We had 1 or 2 grants for a total of about $300,000 or $400,000 of people working on tuberculosis. There was no interest in doing it.
Once the investment dried up, young scientists were not choosing to get involved in TB because there were no resources to do that research.
TB, in terms of the global agenda, was utterly neglected for a period of at least 4 decades.
We had a rude awakening in the 1980s when we had HIV. We had that blip up, which is a cold pail of water in our face saying, if you don't pay attention to TB, it has all the capability, even in a highly developed society like the United States, of bouncing back.
And now our vulnerabilities have been exposed. We're sitting in the world today with 1.4 million deaths, 9 million new cases each year of TB. That's a person dying every 30 seconds of this disease.
Now all of a sudden looms up this realization that tuberculosis is a very, very serious problem, and particularly when you're dealing with multiple drug-resistant and extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis, it's getting worse.
MDR-TB is not like normal tuberculosis. Altogether, I was resistant to 7 drugs.
Very hardcore drugs.
The side effects of all those drugs were awful.
I used to get so tired standing for more than 5 minutes. Cycloserine, one of the drugs that I was on, the doctors joke and call it psychoserine because they say that patients just go crazy on it. It began to affect my short-term memory. I would constantly repeat myself. I would forget to show up places. I would forget to pay my rent and the bills. My fingers were numb. I would drop my cups of coffee in the morning.
You keep hearing something new with some of the drugs. You just didn't know what to expect.
So we didn't know if she was taking these drugs, whether they were even working or not.
I can remember one day at my apartment being on my knees and thinking, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of doing this. And I don't know that I'll make it through this.
We did not discuss it with the 3 of us, but we all knew inside that there was a real possibility that she might not live.
The reason why TB needs such special attention is that it doesn't get any. I mean, if I told you there was an airborne deadly disease that you could catch just by breathing in, that was killing over 1,000 people every day, would that make you a little bit nervous?
When you say how many people have TB, so how many people have the bacteria in their body? A third of the world's population, over 2 billion. 1 out of 10 people who are infected will actually develop the disease at some point in their life, and that individual can infect up to 10 to 15 more people. These are the high disease burden countries: South Africa, India, China, Russia, many countries in Eastern Europe and throughout Africa. If you're poor and live in poor areas, you're more at risk. That's where the majority of the disease exists. But this is the modern world, the age of globalization. People are moving, they're taking buses, they're taking trains, they're mingling with many other people.
This is not a poor man's disease alone. This is also a middle class and a rich person's disease. You know, tuberculosis is infectious. Anyone can get it.
I think we're living in the developed world with the threat that dangerous drug-resistant strains of this disease are just a plane ride away in our global world and economy.
These bacteria don't carry passports. This is a global phenomenon.
And in some point in all this, so I know how much money it was. I was such a burden to our health department by having MDR, and I drained their budget. We've just started figuring all of this out now, and it's really close to $1 million. It's completely unrealistic to think that, 10 people can be treated this way. We live in one of the richest countries in the world, and I know that if my case was a burden here, that this is not realistic to think that we can do this in a country where this disease is rampant and raging.
This is an expensive disease. You have not only the treatment costs in the billions, you have lost productivity and wages in the billions.
It's incredibly expensive to treat tuberculosis here in the UK. You're looking at £5,000 for a regular case of tuberculosis, extensively drug-resistant TB, you're looking at over £100,000. And that's per case. So if you go undiagnosed for 6 months and you've got drug-resistant TB, there's £500,000 minimum of expenditure to try and just treat the cases, let alone do all the associated testing to try and find where else it might have spent in the community and make sure that you've got it all.
It's responsible for about 0.5% of the global economy's output. What does that really mean? 2010 terms, it's about $380 billion a year lost due to TB alone.
The kind of fear that we used to have of tuberculosis in the developed world is gone. The urgency, the attention we used to pay to it, that's not here anymore. The statistic that blows my mind is that if we were able to go to 100% detection for TB, so imagine we're in a perfect world. We're finding every person who has TB, we're treating every person that has TB, and they're all getting better. In the year 2050, there will still be 1 million new cases of tuberculosis every year because so many people still have the TB bacteria in their bodies. That's down from 9 million a year currently, so that would be a big success. But what that tells me is that we're never truly going to eradicate this disease without a vaccine.
Well, there's no effective vaccine against pulmonary TB, the most infectious form of TB. In the end, we really have to think about new tools, new drugs, new diagnostics, and new vaccines to treat one of the deadliest infectious diseases of humankind. I think it's the world's responsibility to deal with diseases that threaten us. This is about all of us. It's about me, it's about you, it's about our families. And I don't think any of us are really truly protected from a disease like TB.
Walking out of my very last infusion, I can remember feeling so triumphant and just thinking, thank God, I have made it. My husband, Brad, he's a contractor. I'll go and help him clean up the site. I have so much more energy, and I feel like me. Tuberculosis has really changed me. Now I can give a voice to the disease. I believe that a vaccine is completely necessary. It could have meant 5 years of my life back. Tuberculosis is not a disease that discriminates If you breathe in, you can catch it.
Thank you.